There are disappearances that eventually find an answer. Then there are the rare cases that seem to become more unsettling with every passing year. Imagine walking past your neighbor's home on an ordinary morning. The family car is still outside. The lights are still on. Dinner is still sitting on the table. Their phones, wallets, and everyday belongings haven't moved an inch, yet the parents and their children are simply gone. No struggle, no farewell, no confirmed sighting. Just a silence that has refused to break. Today's story is inspired by one of America's most puzzling family disappearance cases, with names changed for storytelling, where investigators spent years chasing answers that never fully came. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. For everyone who knew Ethan and Rebecca Carter, their life looked wonderfully ordinary. They lived in a quiet American neighborhood where children still rode their bicycles until sunset and neighbors exchanged friendly waves across neatly kept lawns. Ethan was known as a dependable father who rarely missed one of his children's school events. Rebecca had a warm personality that made friends feel welcome the moment they stepped inside their home. Their two children, 12-year-old Mason and 8-year-old Lily, were the kind of siblings who could be heard laughing in the backyard almost every weekend. Family photographs showed camping trips, birthday celebrations, holiday dinners, and ordinary moments that seemed almost too familiar to attract anyone's attention. Looking back, investigators would spend countless hours studying those photographs, wondering if the answers had been hidden in plain sight all along. At first glance, nothing suggested this family was living through anything unusual. They paid their bills, greeted their neighbors, attended school functions, and spoke about future plans just like everyone else around them. It was the picture of stability, and that image would later become one of the greatest obstacles investigators faced. When a family appears completely ordinary, people often overlook the quiet details that don't seem important until it's too late. As detectives began interviewing relatives, friends, co-workers, and neighbors, a more complicated picture slowly emerged. None of the details alone appeared alarming, but together they formed a pattern that refused to disappear. Ethan had recently mentioned feeling overwhelmed by financial responsibilities, although no one believed the situation was severe enough to force the family to leave without warning. Rebecca had become unusually private during the weeks leading up to their disappearance, quietly ending phone calls whenever someone entered the room, and occasionally staring out the living room window as though she expected someone to arrive. Friends later recalled that she seemed distracted, but insisted everything was fine whenever they asked if something was wrong. Mason had told one of his classmates that his parents had been arguing more often than usual, yet he laughed it off moments later and changed the subject. Lily remained her cheerful self, excited about an upcoming school activity she had talked about for days. Even the family's closest relatives dismissed these moments as the ordinary pressures of everyday life. Nobody imagined they were remembering what would become the final conversations they would ever have with the Carter family. And then investigators uncovered one final detail that transformed those ordinary memories into something impossible to ignore. A discovery that would make the last evening the Carters were seen together far more important than anyone had first believed. The final confirmed evening of the Carter family's ordinary routine would later become the most carefully examined timeline in the entire investigation. Investigators reconstructed every known movement, every phone call, and every conversation, hoping that one overlooked detail might explain what happened before sunrise. Ethan finished work and returned home at his usual time. Rebecca prepared dinner while Mason talked about school, and Lily excitedly shared plans for the week ahead. Neighbors remembered seeing lights glowing through the front windows, just as they had on countless evenings before. Nothing appeared unusual enough to make anyone stop and look twice. No loud arguments were reported. No obvious signs of panic drew attention. If something had begun to unfold inside the house that night, it happened quietly enough that the outside world never noticed. By the following morning, the scene made almost no sense. The family vehicle remained parked outside. Personal belongings were still inside the house. Everyday items suggested the Carters expected to continue their normal lives. Yet Ethan, Rebecca, Mason, and Lily were nowhere to be found. There was no confirmed evidence that they had left together voluntarily, and no immediate indication of a violent struggle inside the home. Detectives secured the property, interviewed neighbors, reviewed available records, and appealed to the public for information. As news spread, theories multiplied faster than evidence. Some believed the family had chosen to disappear. Others suspected an unknown offender. Every possibility seemed plausible for a moment, only to raise even more questions. And just as investigators feared, the trail had already gone cold. A small piece of evidence surfaced, one that would send the investigation in an entirely different direction. The first 48 hours were critical, yet every passing hour seemed to deepen the mystery surrounding Ethan, Rebecca, Mason, and Lily Carter. Detectives retraced the family's final known movements, speaking with neighbors, relatives, coworkers, and anyone who might have crossed paths with them during their last evening at home. Every interview produced another small piece of information, but none of those pieces fit together. One neighbor was certain the family had settled in for the night as usual after seeing the living room lights glowing well past sunset. Another insisted an unfamiliar dark-colored SUV had been parked several houses away for nearly an hour before quietly disappearing. Investigators could not verify the sighting, but they couldn't dismiss it either. Phone records showed no emergency calls. Bank accounts remained untouched. Credit cards showed no activity after that evening. It was as if the Carter family had simply stepped out of existence without leaving behind a single reliable trail. Then the investigation took an unexpected turn. During a second search of the property, a detective noticed something everyone else had overlooked. Hidden beneath a stack of ordinary household papers was a folded envelope with no address and no stamp. Inside was a handwritten note containing only a short message and a date that meant nothing to the investigators at first glance. The handwriting appeared familiar, yet experts could not immediately determine who had written it or why it had been concealed. When detectives compared that date with information gathered from interviews, they realized it matched an event the Carter family had never mentioned to friends or relatives. Suddenly, what had seemed like an ordinary disappearance no longer looked so ordinary. The unanswered questions multiplied, and investigators began to wonder whether someone had been carefully preparing for this moment long before anyone realized there was reason to worry. The contents of that mysterious note would soon force detectives to reconsider every assumption they had made about the Carter family and reveal that the truth might be far more complicated than anyone had imagined. By the end of the first week, the disappearance of Ethan, Rebecca, Mason, and Lily Carter had become national news. Investigators established a dedicated tip line, and reports poured in from across the country. Every hour seemed to bring another possible breakthrough. A family matching their description was reportedly seen checking into a roadside motel hundreds of miles away. Detectives rushed to verify the claim, only to discover it was another family with a similar appearance. Days later, another caller insisted Ethan had withdrawn a large amount of cash from an ATM in a neighboring state. Surveillance footage quickly proved the customer was someone else entirely. Then came a report from a truck driver who believed he had seen Rebecca and the children at a remote gas station shortly after midnight. Once again, investigators followed the lead with cautious optimism, but security cameras revealed no trace of the Carter family. Each promising development generated headlines, raised hopes, and then collapsed under closer examination, leaving investigators exactly where they had started. As public attention intensified, speculation began spreading even faster than verified information. Some believed Ethan had secretly planned for the family to disappear because of financial difficulties. Others argued Rebecca had uncovered something that placed them all in danger. Online forums filled with theories, each claiming to explain the mystery with absolute certainty despite having little evidence to support the claims. Detectives repeatedly reminded the public that assumptions could distract from credible leads, but separating fact from rumor became increasingly difficult. Even people who genuinely wanted to help sometimes misremembered details after seeing constant news coverage. Every false lead consumed valuable time and resources, forcing investigators to revisit the same questions again and again. Despite exhaustive searches, extensive interviews, and thousands of tips, no explanation could account for how an entire family had vanished so completely. Then, just as the case appeared to be slipping into another dead end, forensic analysts uncovered one overlooked piece of evidence that had been sitting in police custody from the very beginning. It had seemed too ordinary to matter, but once examined more closely, it challenged nearly every theory investigators had considered and pointed the investigation toward a possibility no one had seriously entertained before. The evidence that had been overlooked for days was something investigators had handled from the very beginning, yet its significance only became clear after specialists re-examined every item collected from the Carter home. It was a digital storage device tucked inside an old family photo album, hidden so carefully that it blended in with the pages. At first, detectives assumed it contained nothing more than family photographs or personal documents. Instead, forensic analysts recovered encrypted files, deleted messages, and a timeline of events that suggested Ethan and Rebecca had been quietly documenting a growing fear for several months. The files did not provide a complete explanation, but they shattered one assumption almost immediately. There was no indication that the family had been planning to abandon their lives voluntarily. On the contrary, the recovered information pointed toward a family making long-term plans for birthdays, school events, vacations, and home improvements. Their future had been carefully mapped out, making the theory of a planned disappearance far less convincing than many had believed. As investigators pieced together the recovered information, another discovery forced them to reconsider every interview conducted during the first week of the investigation. Several conversations that had once seemed ordinary suddenly carried a different meaning when placed alongside the digital evidence. A neighbor remembered Ethan mentioning that he had recently noticed the same unfamiliar vehicle passing through the neighborhood more than once. Rebecca had confided to a close friend that she felt as though someone was paying unusual attention to the family, though she dismissed it as anxiety and chose not to report it. At the time, these comments appeared unrelated, but together they suggested that the Carters may have sensed something was wrong long before they disappeared. Detectives returned to witnesses they had already interviewed, this time asking different questions and reconstructing the final days with renewed urgency. The investigation was no longer centered on whether Ethan and Rebecca had chosen to leave. Instead, it focused on discovering who, if anyone, had entered their lives without attracting attention. Then came another unexpected development. A witness who had remained silent since the beginning finally contacted investigators, claiming to have seen something during the Carter family's final night that had never appeared in any official report. If the account proved accurate, it could rewrite the entire timeline of the disappearance. The witness came forward quietly, asking investigators to keep their identity confidential until they could be interviewed in person. According to the statement, they had been driving through the neighborhood shortly after midnight when they noticed movement near the Carter home. It wasn't the sight of Ethan, Rebecca, Mason, or Lily that caught their attention. It was another person standing near the edge of the property, watching the house without approaching it. The witness described the individual as calm, almost as if they were waiting for something to happen. They remembered slowing their vehicle for only a few seconds before continuing home, thinking nothing of it at the time. When detectives compared the witness's estimated time with the reconstructed timeline, they realized the observation fit within the narrow window when the Carter family was believed to have vanished. Yet despite extensive efforts, no one could identify the mysterious figure, and no available surveillance footage clearly captured their face. The statement was compelling, but without independent evidence, investigators could neither confirm nor dismiss it. The case entered another frustrating chapter. Every new clue seemed to answer one question while creating two more. Detectives revisited the Carter home once again, searching every room with techniques that had not been available during the initial investigation. They recovered additional trace evidence, but none of it could conclusively explain what had happened that night. Years passed, investigators retired, and new detectives inherited shelves filled with reports, photographs, interviews, and unanswered questions. Ethan, Rebecca, Mason, and Lily Carter remained missing, their story becoming one of those rare cases that refuse to fit neatly into any single theory. Some investigators believe the answer was hidden inside the evidence already collected, waiting for one overlooked connection. Others believed the key witness had never realized the importance of what they had seen. To this day, the disappearance continues to raise the same haunting question that has echoed since the very beginning. If an ordinary family can vanish without a confirmed explanation, how many crucial clues can exist in plain sight before anyone recognizes their true significance? And after hearing every piece of the story, which theory do you believe comes closest to the truth? Remember, this is a fictional story inspired by themes found in real missing person investigations, not a reconstruction of a specific real case. The Carter family never returned home. Ethan, Rebecca, Mason, and Lily became a reminder of how quickly ordinary lives can be transformed into enduring mysteries, and how some questions continue to outlive every theory created to answer them. Throughout this story, we followed every lead, examined every possibility, and revisited every clue, yet one truth remains unchanged. Certainty is often the first thing to disappear. Was the mysterious figure outside the house connected to their disappearance, or simply an innocent passerby remembered through the uncertainty of time? Did investigators overlook the one piece of evidence that could have changed everything, or was the answer never inside the house at all? Cases like this remind us that every witness sees only a fragment of the truth, every investigator works with incomplete information, and every unanswered question leaves room for countless interpretations. Sometimes the greatest mystery isn't what we know, it's what we can never prove. Now it's your turn. After hearing every detail of the Carter family's story, what do you believe happened on that final night? Which clues stood out to you the most? And if you had been leading the investigation, where would you have focused your search first? Share your theory in the comments, because some of the most thoughtful discussions come from viewers who notice details others miss. If you enjoyed this documentary-style mystery and want more stories that challenge assumptions and keep you guessing until the very end, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next investigation. Thank you for watching, and remember, this story is a work of fiction inspired by themes common to real missing person investigations. Until next time, stay curious, keep asking questions, and never underestimate the importance of the smallest detail.